A boy was being shoved off a cliff by his shameless master, but instead of resenting him, he felt grateful for what the old man had done, because this was an era where rankings defined everything. The weak wasted their lives in mediocrity, while the strong dictated the rules. Yet Turamar village, hidden away in a remote corner, seemed completely forgotten by that era, still clinging to its old, untouched peace. "Can you help me plow the field?" The 16-year-old was stopped by a villager yet again. He was just about to nod when a flying kick suddenly came at him, and the one who threw it was none other than his childhood friend, Yuna. The villager muttered helplessly, "But he's obviously free right now." Yuna instantly snapped, "That's exactly why you all keep treating him like free labor. He never knows how to say no." But Ro Wu, the one she had just stepped in to protect, only gave his usual simple smile. He had lost his family when he was young, and this village was the one that took him in. That was why he loved the peace here, and why he was willing to repay that kindness with his own hard work. Seeing that harmless grin on Ro Wu's face, Yuna couldn't help but laugh, then lowered her voice and asked, "Do you want to see what's outside the village?" Her eyes sparkled with restless longing. Unfortunately, a passing grandmother overheard everything and instantly flew into a rage. "Did you forget the village rules? We are not allowed to leave." Watching Yuna get dragged away, one of the men quietly told Ro Wu, "You've always been obedient and honest, but Yuna's different. She's lively, bright, always yearning for the outside world. After saying something like that, she'll probably be locked up to reflect." 2 days later, Yuna secretly slipped out anyway and quietly sent Ro Wu a signal that she was about to stir something up. Driven by a curiosity they could no longer suppress, the two of them silently stepped onto the forbidden road beyond the village. And when they reached the far end of the village, a vast world beyond anything they had ever imagined suddenly opened up before them. Then Yuna pulled out an old book she had stolen from her grandmother and excitedly explained, "The outside world runs on something called rankings. Virtue, ability, class, profession, weapons, wealth, even intelligence can be ranked. I want to become an adventurer, a ranked one. I want to go farther and meet people stronger than anyone here." Then she reached her hand out to Ro Wu. "Do you remember? Back when you saved me, your body was glowing with this strange light. Ro Wu, once you get serious, you're stronger than anyone. You don't belong in a place like this. Come with me." But Ro Wu shook his head. "I like the peace in this village. I can't go with you. I'm staying here." Hearing that, Yuna stomped her foot in frustration and snapped, "You stubborn idiot!" Then she turned and ran off. But not long after that, a deafening blast tore across the sky. Ro Wu instantly looked up, only to see a massive island hanging above the village like a miracle from the heavens. A terrible sense of dread hit him at once, and he ran back toward the village like a madman. But when he got there, all he saw was a gigantic crater that had swallowed everything whole. The village, Yuna, the villagers, all of them were gone. Ro Wu dropped to his knees at the edge of the crater, and the crushing despair nearly stole his breath away. Right then, a mysterious man quietly appeared behind him. Seeing that the boy didn't react at all, the man spoke first. "Are you a survivor from Turamar? Don't bother. That island is already gone. Give up." The words stabbed straight into Ro Wu's nerves. He suddenly grabbed the man and screamed in utter despair, "Tell me what happened to the people in my village. Answer me." The man tried to pull free and let out a quiet sigh. "Even if you knew, it would still be beyond what you can handle. Forget everything that happened here. Take the address I give you and go there. At least then, you'll survive." But Ro Wu only tightened his grip and roared, "Tell me the truth." That was finally enough to irritate the man. "Why did the village disappear? This isn't something a kid like you can meddle in." But at that moment, Yuna's voice suddenly echoed in Ro Wu's ears. "Ro Wu, once you get serious, you're stronger than anyone." Rage and the desperate will to protect exploded inside him all at once. A visible sphere of energy instantly surged around his body, and the violent waves it gave off even caused the surrounding space to warp. The man, who had been about to leave, stopped dead in his tracks, shock written all over his face. That power was so pure and intense it had practically taken form, and he never imagined he would find someone with talent like this in a forgotten place like this. Could this be Prana? Memories of the legends surrounding the survivors of Babel flashed through his mind, and his gaze turned complicated. Then, without warning, the man threw the sword in his hand toward Ro Wu. "If you really want to go to that island, then pick up that sword and attack me. Show me your potential, and I'll tell you the truth. I might even train you myself." The moment Ro Wu wrapped his hand around the hilt, the confusion vanished from his eyes, replaced by absolute focus. In a single burst, he flashed forward and reached the man in an instant. Steel crashed against steel with a sharp metallic roar. While blocking the attack, the man couldn't help but marvel inwardly. This kid's prana flow is on a completely different level. He's a born fighter. After several exchanges, the man fully confirmed Ro Wu's resolve and talent. He lowered his sword, and finally spoke. That island is the legendary Island of the Gods. It normally stays hidden, only appearing in extremely rare places and triggering all kinds of bizarre phenomena. I've spent my life trying to stop incidents like this, but this time, I was still too late. Anyone touched by that strange light was probably pulled into the island. Ro-Woo urgently asked, "Is there a way to get up there on our own?" Adore answered, "The first requirement for entering the Island of the Gods is breaking into the top 1% of the adventurer rankings. And ever since that island was first observed, it has been classified as one of the most dangerous zones in existence. Anyone who aimed for the very top and tried to board it almost never came back alive. Even so, do you still want to go?" Ro-Woo's eyes never wavered. "I do. I'm going, and I'm bringing everyone back." "Good. Starting today, I'll train you for 1 year. But the only thing I can teach you is swordsmanship. After 1 year, how far you climb and whether you earn the right to set foot on that island will depend entirely on you. My name is Adore. I am humanity's strongest knight." The boy immediately held out his hand. "I'm Ro-Woo." Adore took his hand, then said in a severe tone, "Prepare yourself. You're the first person I've ever personally trained with a sword. If you want to know more, then figure it out through your own strength. If you can't, give up now." And just like that, a year straight out of hell began. Adore's training was brutal beyond words. Every strike he made carried enough killing intent to be lethal. He demonstrated each technique only once and never wasted time explaining it. Ro-Woo had no choice but to memorize with his body, understand through instinct, and force himself to adapt through the constant surges of prana bursting out of him. He hovered on the edge of death again and again, and the old wounds covering his body only kept piling up. The only things keeping him standing were his determination to save the villagers and the last smile Yuna left behind. 1 year later, Ro-Woo's eyes had turned razor sharp. His build was steady and composed, and every trace of childishness had vanished. He just stood there in silence, yet the aura around him felt like a blade already drawn from its sheath. Adore walked up behind him and calmly asked, "Have you resolved yourself?" Ro-Woo did not answer right away. Instead, he slowly closed his eyes. Yuna's voice still seemed to echo beside his ear. "Ro-Woo, let's go on an adventure together." Her dream, her disappearance, and the kindness the villagers had once shown him had all become the absolute force driving him forward. He slowly opened his eyes. His gaze pierced into the distance, and his voice came out hard as iron. "I will become the strongest on the adventurer rankings, climb onto the Island of the Gods, and bring everyone back." And with that vow, Ro-Woo finally left Turamar village and arrived at the Turkista certification branch on the far side of the royal capital of the Valter Kingdom. The young woman, Luca, jolted awake from her nap, as she still had a mountain of ranking reports to review. And today, there was also a fresh batch of new adventurers waiting to be certified. Running late, Luca hurried off to meet her coworkers, only to be sharply reprimanded by a female team member. "You and I do not hold the same position. If you are not in proper condition, then you have no business evaluating other people's ranks." A truly outstanding certifier had to travel all over the world because the rankings of top-tier powerhouses could change at any moment. But the job demanded an absurd level of professional skill, and every certifier had to survive layer after layer of harsh examinations. That was why it was known as one of the hardest professions in the world, with only a tiny handful of people truly qualified to do it. Even as a low-level certifier, Luca still longed to become better. Unfortunately, she had never encountered a truly core-level powerhouse, partly because her standards were so high, and partly because, in her eyes, most of the ranked fighters coming in no longer had any hunger to keep climbing. Ranking competition was nowhere near as fierce as it used to be, and most of the lists had already solidified, which made Luca complain that even her work as a certifier was starting to lose its meaning. Meanwhile, inside the exam hall were the candidates taking this year's third adventurer ranking registration test. Looking across the half-empty room, Luca guessed that it might have something to do with the incident in the danger zone 2 months ago. At that moment, a female staff member said to her, "Quite a few serious contenders showed up this time. One of them is Olda. He's considered one of the top fighters in this country. There's also Eddie, ranked number 402 on the archer rankings. He comes from a family of archers." Luca suddenly cut in. "And don't forget this one. He's a powerhouse who's ranked in both the knight rankings and the overall rankings." Then she added confidently, "Getting information on people like that is easy for me. If I'm going to become the greatest certifier for adventurers, then I need to know my homework inside and out." Suddenly, the sound of a bell cut their conversation short. Right after that, the female staff member hurried downstairs to the registration desk. There, a young man stepped forward and asked, "Is this where I sign up?" The staff member smiled and answered, "First-time registration can only be handled in a certification nation, and the exam is about to begin. If you want to join, please fill out this form first." The exam fee is 3,000 common coins. The young man immediately wrote down his basic information on the form. Luca, now curious, walked over as well. But when the two of them found out that he knew absolutely nothing about the registration rules, they were both stunned. In this day and age, someone who didn't even understand the certification system was practically unheard of. At the same time, Ro-woo stepped into the exam hall. The female staff member began explaining the rules. The exam has 3 parts: a written test, a practical test, and a final test that will be explained before it begins. Your overall score will determine whether you pass, and the practical test will take place in the forest outside the city 2 hours from now. Moments later, the written exam came to an end. When the two women started grading the papers, Luca suddenly noticed one sheet that was completely wrong from top to bottom. What is going on with candidate number 53? He didn't get a single question right. She couldn't help complaining. Even if he's supposed to be some village's last great hope, he can't just bubble things in at random like this. A moment later, the scene shifted as the female staff member explained the rules of the practical test to the arriving candidates. Your scores will be arranged from left to right, from lowest to highest. If there are no questions, then your exam begins now. The instant she finished speaking, the candidates exploded forward and rushed toward the practical testing grounds. After all the candidates had left, the female staff member asked Luca, "Did you see anyone you liked this time?" But Luca shook her head again and said there still wasn't anyone she truly believed in. Just then, Olda walked over. "Am I the first one back?" As he spoke, he held out the green light stone in his hand. The female staff member looked confused. "You still had plenty of time to go for a higher score." But Olda answered casually, "I'm a mercenary by trade. I'm not that obsessed with rankings." The next to arrive was Eddie, who handed over a tail feather from a flock bird. Its appraisal result came back as 180 points. Olda glanced at the feather and looked completely unimpressed. Seeing that, Eddie fired back immediately. Flock birds are fast, silent, and nearly impossible to track. With your eyesight, you wouldn't even be able to spot one. At that moment, as it looked like the two were about to clash, a trace of excitement flashed through Luca's eyes. Suddenly, a dragging sound scraped across the ground from afar. Everyone turned around at once, only to see a young man walking toward them while dragging a giant bear with one hand. And his explanation was even crazier. "I didn't know how to remove Grizz's gallbladder, so I just brought the whole corpse. Can I still submit it like this?" The female staff member froze on the spot. "You can. But don't you think that's a little excessive?" Just like that, once Grizz's gallbladder was appraised at 300 points, the whispers spreading nearby immediately caught Luca's attention. Someone had actually witnessed the boy killing Grizz with their own eyes, and according to them, Grizz had lunged straight at him. But before they could even see how Ro-woo moved, a flash of cold steel cut through the air, and Grizz dropped on the spot. Hearing that, Luca couldn't help glancing toward the boy again. An hour later, everyone gathered in the center of the arena, and the female staff member began explaining the rules of the final test. The duty of an adventurer is to open up new land, which means traveling to places where barely anyone has ever set foot. And in places like that, the greatest threats are usually outlaws like bandits and pirates. If you want to drive them back, raw strength is essential. That is why the final exam will be a mock battle. Candidates will compete in grouped matches, but this test is only meant to display your individual ability, so know when to stop. After 8 fierce and exhausting rounds of combat, the final list of winners was decided at last. Candidate number 27, candidate number 41, and candidate number 53. But then the final match announcement completely caught everyone off guard. Olda and Eddie would be fighting together against number 53, Ro-woo. The female staff member gasped on the spot. "You've got to be kidding. The gap in strength is way too wide." But Luca's eyes were glowing with excitement and anticipation. "If I'm right about this, then that guy might be a terrifying monster." By now, everyone had gathered around what looked like an absurdly one-sided fight. Quiet chatter spread through the crowd, and nearly every face carried the same doubtful expression. Luca, however, was nothing like the others. She kept her eyes locked on the arena, openly waiting for what was about to happen. After all, compared to the mysterious Ro-woo, who had no known background at all, Olda already had a string of impressive accomplishments behind him, and it showed in the pride he carried. Rumor had it that he had once wiped out an entire high-level criminal organization by himself, a feat that had earned him the admiration of many. As for Eddie, there was no need to say much more. He had been personally trained by his father, the number 2 archer on the rankings, so most people believed this mismatch would be over in no time. The moment the female staff member declared the match had begun, Eddie instantly raised his short bow and fired a vicious arrow. Just as the arrow was about to hit Ro-woo, he suddenly twisted sideways and dodged, then burst toward Olda on the opposite side with a speed so explosive that nobody had time to react. Their blades crashed together in an instant, unleashing a sharp, metallic ring. Olda froze for a split second. He clearly hadn't expected Wu to be this fast. After several exchanges, Wu had already started to read the rhythm of his opponent's attacks. The moment he caught the opening in Ulda's guard, he snapped his sword upward, and Ulda immediately lost his balance, panic spreading across his face. Wu was just about to press the attack and finish him with a second strike when Eddie's arrows came flying in again. 3 arrows closed in on him at the same time, yet Wu remained completely calm. He split the first one apart with a single slash, then spun his sword in a swift backhand and knocked away the other 2, sending them off course and burying them deep into the spectator's stands behind him. The spectators instantly sucked in a sharp breath. After that exchange, both Ulda and Eddie had gained a whole new understanding of Wu's strength, and shock filled their eyes. But then Wu suddenly asked them, "You two are on the rankings too?" There was even a hint of curiosity in his voice. The 2 of them froze for a second before blurting out their rankings, all while wondering what exactly Wu was trying to get at. Wu followed up right away. "If I beat you, will my ranking go up?" The moment the words left his mouth, prana began gathering around his body. That visible surge of power instantly left everyone around him staring in disbelief. The moment Lucas saw that energy, her eyes widened in shock. On the other side, Eddie snapped at Wu in frustration. "My archer ranking is 402, but when it comes to precision shooting, I'm ranked 78. He never got to finish." Wu landed a perfectly timed strike and knocked him unconscious on the spot. Watching his partner go down that fast, Ulda immediately started thinking about retreat, but in the very next second, Wu had already flashed behind him. The edge of his blade pressed against his neck, turning Ulda's face pale. At that moment, Ulda hurriedly shouted that he surrendered, his voice trembling the whole time. Luckily for him, he gave up fast enough to avoid ending up like Eddie, and part of him was secretly relieved. As Wu lowered his sword, Ulda still couldn't help stealing another glance at him, and only one thought remained in his head. This kid really is a monster. On the other side, Luca was just as shaken by the power Wu had shown. She immediately turned and ran to the records room, where she began digging through file after file, desperately searching for anything related to the boy. Her mind was full of urgency. After gathering what little she could, she became so excited that she seriously started setting her sights on recruiting Wu. But before she could even recover from that excitement, the sight in front of her left her completely stunned. A huge crowd of certifiers had already surrounded Wu from all sides, each one trying to recruit him first. Then the boy suddenly asked, "What exactly does a personal certifier do?" That question gave Luca the opening she needed, and she immediately jumped in before anyone else could cut her off. A personal certifier is someone assigned specifically to serve a ranked powerhouse and update that person's ranking at any time. As she explained, she carefully watched Wu's reaction. Under normal circumstances, ranking updates can only happen after a certification nation sends someone out to evaluate you. But if you have a personal certifier with you, your ranking can be updated immediately, no matter where you are. For elite adventurers who spend their lives traveling all over the world, that's incredibly convenient. Afraid Wu might not fully get it, she added. And there's also a dedicated device called a netlink terminal. Through it, you can check the latest ranking information whenever you want. The more Luca spoke, the more fired up she became, until she finally summed it up in one breath. "So if you want to climb efficiently, then yes, you really should hire a personal certifier." After hearing that, Wu replied, "If you want to be my personal certifier, then I have one condition." He looked across all the certifiers standing there and asked, "Is there anyone among you who can get me into the top 1% of the rankings?" The moment those words came out, the entire place fell dead silent. Everyone there was stunned by Wu's demand. After all, on an adventurer ranking packed with monsters, even outstanding swordsmanship alone was rarely enough to carry someone all the way to the top. But right then, Luca chased after him anyway, because she desperately wanted to understand why this boy was so obsessed. In the next moment, Luca ran up to Wu, still out of breath, and asked, "Why are you so dead set on breaking into the top 10 of the adventurer rankings?" Wu answered flatly, "That has nothing to do with you. I have my reasons." But Luca shot back immediately, "Then I'll make it my business. Let me be your personal certifier. I'll help you break into the top 10. Wu shook his head. "Forget it. I don't want to drag a kid into this." Luca instantly got heated and shouted, cheeks flushed, "Who are you calling a kid? I'm a certifier!" But Wu calmly replied, "To be honest, even if you weren't a kid, I still had no intention of worrying about anyone else. There's something I have to accomplish, even if it cost me my life." "Wait." Luca cut him off at once. "You may have your own reasons you can't talk about, but I also have something I absolutely have to do. So let's be partners. We'll chase after the things each of us wants to protect." Hearing those sincere words from the girl, Wu was finally moved. Not long after that, the two quickly came to an agreement. After bringing Wu to an inn, Luca proudly showed off her choice. "Well, not bad, right? I rented this room for a few days, so we'll use it as our base for now." "Sure. I didn't expect you to put me on a trial period, but that's fine. Over the next week, I'll make sure you see exactly what I'm capable of. By then, you'll gladly admit I'm the real deal and come begging me to be your personal certifier." Wu only replied in his usual calm tone. "That'd be nice. Just make sure you can back up all that talk." Luca immediately went speechless. "You're terrifying in a fight, so why do you feel kind of dense the rest of the time? Does everyone say that about you?" After the two of them took a short break, Luca's Netlink terminal suddenly rang. The exam results had come out. Wu, Adventurer ranking, 2728. Registration exam, passed. Luca smiled right away. Congrats. Getting placed in the 2000s right after registering is already unbelievably exceptional. But Wu was not satisfied with that rank at all. He had assumed that after defeating 2 fighters ranked in the triple digits, he would at least break into the triple digits himself. Luca explained, "Competition in the Adventurer rankings is insanely fierce. It's nothing like the other rankings. You're already strong on other lists, but the overall Adventurer rankings are a different beast. For example, your swordsmanship ranking is number 58, which is already extremely impressive. And the 2 people you fought earlier both had rankings on multiple lists too. Take Ulda. He's ranked 753 in the Mercenary Corps rankings, 521 in the Knight rankings, 209 in the Special Cleanup rankings, and 2,831 in the Informant rankings. And then there's Eddie. He's ranked 402 in the Archer rankings, 78 in Precision Shooting, 211 in Reconnaissance, and even number 19 in Mushroom Cultivation. One person can hold multiple rankings, and that gives a much more complete picture of what they can do. That's why I want you to register for a few more ranking categories too." But Wu answered immediately, "I don't want to waste time on things I don't need." Luca let out a helpless sigh. "Yeah, I knew you were going to say that. I haven't known you long, but I already feel like I'm starting to understand you. Anyway, your whole goal is to take the fastest route into the top 10 and head for the Island of the Gods, right?" Wu glanced at her. "How do you know that the privilege of reaching the top 10 of the Adventurer rankings is only that?" Luca's expression turned serious. "When your trial period is over, I'll tell you about my side too. If we're going to work together, then being honest with each other matters. Though my situation might be a little hard for you to understand." At that, Luca's expression suddenly dimmed. It was clear that whatever she wanted to say still wasn't something she could bring herself to reveal yet. She quickly changed the subject and asked, "By the way, where did you learn all this? Especially your swordsmanship?" Wu answered calmly. "A year ago, I became Sir Ador's disciple." Luca froze in shock. "Ador? You mean the one ranked number 1 on the Knight rankings? He actually took a disciple? And you got this strong after training for only 1 year? That's huge news." Ador is famous for never teaching swordsmanship to anyone. Countless people begged him for guidance before, and every single one of them got turned away. There was even a rumor that he would only pass down his sword art to the next number 1 on the Knight rankings. If that's true, then doesn't that make you his successor? If the other knights found out about this, they'd be absolutely stunned. Hearing all that, even Wu started wondering if his bargain bin master was really that incredible. Right then, Luca lowered her gaze and checked his personal information again. "The first time you signed up, you used just Wu. But this time, your registration says Wu Turi. Turi, is that your family name?" Wu shook his head. "Of course not. Turi is the name of the village where I used to live." Luca replied softly. "Thank you for telling me that." Now that everything had finally been sorted out, Luca looked far more relaxed and casually removed the cap from her head. At that moment, Wu looked at her as her long hair fell loose, and something in him shifted for a second. Then he blurted out, "So you're actually a girl." The moment those words came out, Luca was hit with a mix of embarrassment and irritation, and could only grumble inwardly that this guy really was a total idiot. Before long, morning came. After a brief greeting, the two decided to head to a nearby restaurant and talk over breakfast. Luca said, "Field exploration is the foundation of being an adventurer. I think you should start by taking commissions. On top of that, commissions also pay. So it's perfect for someone just starting out like you. And with the Netlink terminal in our hands, we can accept jobs anytime." After hearing that, Wu finally got a rough idea of how commissions worked, and immediately asked, "Then are there any commissions that can raise my ranking easily?" As he said that, his eyes moved straight to the top of the job board. "Then should we take the one at the very top?" The moment he said that, Luca slammed the table in excitement. "That is absolutely impossible." The sudden noise immediately caught the attention of a man sitting behind them. He slowly walked over and asked, "Are you two having some kind of trouble?" The moment Luca saw who it was, her face filled with surprise. "Mr. Lade? I can't believe it's really you. It's been such a long time." Then she immediately lowered her voice and introduced him to Wu. That man is a top-tier powerhouse ranked number 11 on the overall adventurer rankings. The second Wu heard that Lade was ranked 11th. He was reminded of something Ador had once said, that if he ever ran into someone at the top of the rankings, he had to avoid them first, because people at that level were terrifyingly strong, practically monsters. But right then, Luca realized this was the perfect chance and turned toward Lade, making a bold request. "Mr. Lade, could you use this opportunity to teach the guy next to me a lesson?" After agreeing to Luca's request, Lade turned and went to fetch a weapon while the two of them stayed behind and waited. As for Lade himself, he only tossed out a casual remark. "The arena lances are a little light, but they should still do." At that moment, as the man approached, Rowu simply gave a brief introduction and stated his name, but Lade looked straight at him and said, "Luca helped me once in the past. Do you have any idea how much weight she carries as a personal certifier? So now, show me everything you've got. I want to see whether you're truly worthy of having her serve as your personal certifier." Hearing that, Rowu's eyes widened slightly. Right after that, Luca shouted from the side, "This is your chance to see the gap between yourself and a real powerhouse." The moment he heard those words, a huge surge of prana exploded from Rowu's body. In the end, Luca personally announced, rank 27-28, Rowu versus rank 11, Lade. The match officially began. In the very next second, the sound of their weapons crashing together rang out, and Rowu instantly whipped his sword around in a backhand swing. He followed it with a flowing downward slash, only for Lade to dodge it with ease. Yet in that short exchange alone, Lade had already begun reading through Rowu's attack pattern, and the sheer force in his swordsmanship reminded him of one particular man. But in the brief instant Lade's attention slipped, Rowu flashed behind him in a blink. Yet just as Rowu was about to land the hit, Lade blocked it as if he had eyes in the back of his head. Then Lade blurred backward, trying to create some distance, and after easily slipping past Rowu's follow-up, he whipped his lance back toward him in one heavy strike. After that exchange, Rowu immediately realized something. When it came to the sheer depth of prana, he was clearly below Lade. He understood at once that if he stayed locked in close combat, the fight would only turn worse for him, so he decisively leapt back to open the gap. Once they were separated, Lade looked at him in surprise and asked, "What kind of style is that supposed to be?" But Rowu only looked confused, clearly having no idea what Lade even meant. Seeing that, Lade suddenly lowered the lance in his hand. If Rowu would not give him an answer, then he would force one out himself. In the next moment, a flood of golden light burst from Lade's entire body, and even Rowu was briefly stunned by what he saw. As Lade activated his skill, countless golden lances wrapped in flame rained down from the sky, all of them aimed straight at Rowu. At the same time, Lade warned him coldly, "You'd better bring out every bit of power you have, or you really might die." In that instant, Rowu lowered into a combat stance, every nerve in his body tightening as he locked onto each movement of his opponent. But Lade merely adjusted his glasses with one hand, clearly not taking a low-ranked fighter like Rowu all that seriously. Suddenly, he swung his lance, golden light erupting around it as a massive energy-charged assault came crashing down on Rowu. Rowu did not retreat even half a step. He slashed out with his sword and unleashed a green aura blade, barely managing to withstand the attack. Then, as Lade's arm dropped once more, he declared without hesitation, "You won't be able to block what comes next." In an instant, countless golden lances circled around Rowu and trapped him dead at the center. With nowhere left to dodge, Rowu had no choice but to take the full force of the attack head-on. But just as Lade took absolute control and prepared to unleash a second wave, a memory of his master's teachings suddenly flashed through Rowu's mind. Your control over prana is still crude, and if you force that technique out now, it'll never release the kind of true power it's supposed to. But for Rowu in this moment, even if it would not come close to its intended strength, he still had no choice but to gamble everything on it. In the next second, his eyes sharpened like blades, and a massive phantom blade came crashing toward Lade. But the moment Lade saw that move, real shock flashed across his face for the first time. Even he clearly had not expected Rowu to be hiding something like this. Still, his reaction speed was absurd. In an instant, he spun his lance and tried to forcefully block the strike head-on. What he did not expect was that Rowu's sword came even faster. The second he caught the gap in Loda's defense, his blade was already driving straight in. Lade immediately jerked backward, then swung his lance again to intercept. In that split second, the two lights smashed into each other, and the exploding shockwave swept across the entire arena. Even Lade was shaken inside. Could this be a true ultra-high-speed strike? It was so fast that the naked eye could barely track it. The moment that thought crossed his mind, he suddenly hurled his lance, trying to catch Rowu completely off guard. Rowu gritted his teeth and forced more power into his sword, yet the flaming lance still drove his blade back inch by inch. Lade, meanwhile, kept piling on more force, and the figure inside the dust clouds started to waver. In the end, faced with that overwhelmingly tyrannical power, Rowu could not hold the line. He was blown away in an instant. But Lade clearly had no intention of letting him off that easily. He snapped his fingers. In the next moment, countless golden spears materialized out of nowhere, locking onto Rowu like a storm. In the blink of an eye, the entire area around him was completely sealed off. Seeing that scene, Luca was left utterly stunned, horror filling her eyes. In the next second, Rowu's pupils shrank, and for the first time, his face showed a kind of despair that bordered on disbelief. As he activated his skill, Laude coldly warned him, "Never underestimate the adventurer rankings." Before the words had even fully landed, countless golden spears crashed down on Rowu like torrential rain. An instant later, the golden light detonated, swallowing Rowu whole. When the blast finally cleared, his body slammed hard against the ground. Once the fight ended, Laude slowly walked over toward where Luca was standing. Luca immediately thanked him, sincerely grateful for the ruthless lesson he had just given Rowu. But Laude, clearly displeased, asked in return, "Do you really believe this boy can win in the end?" Then he lowered his voice and added, "That boy, he is Ador's disciple, isn't he?" Luca replied right away, "You figured it out? Was it because of that high-speed sword technique?" Laude nodded. "That's right. It belongs to the Sword Saint School. That school has always stayed away from worldly disputes, but it is famous for passing down terrifying swordsmanship from generation to generation. What I did not expect was for a boy who just became an adventurer to have already inherited a technique at that level. In the eyes of the Knight Rankers, though, that would feel no different from someone stealing their honor." Luca frowned. No matter what, it would be best to keep Rowu from crossing paths with the Knight Rankers whenever possible. Hearing that, Laude silently thought to himself that if Rowu became a Knight Ranker too, then perhaps the matter could actually be resolved more peacefully. Just then, Luca suddenly broke his train of thought. "But Rowu told me earlier that he once managed to land an effective hit on a door, and looking at his current level, that should be completely impossible." Laude answered in a low voice. "That was my first thought too. But that boy does not seem like the type who would lie." After thinking for a moment, a possibility slowly formed in his mind. Something unusual must have happened for him to land an effective hit on the Sword Saint. Could it have been a fluctuation in his prana? If that boy has some other special ability on top of that, then it's hard to say whether the one who would have lost this fight would really have been him. Meanwhile, when Rowu opened his eyes, the warmth of the dream still lingered in his mind. In that dream, someone had been softly humming a beautiful melody, and for some reason, it made him feel deeply warm. The moment Luca saw that Rowu was finally awake, she was visibly relieved. She then told him that this was the certification infirmary and that he had been unconscious for an entire day. "And you were sleeping like a puppet with its strings cut. The doctor said your condition right now is the result of extreme mental strain. I don't know what kind of burden you're carrying, but aren't you pushing yourself way too hard?" Hearing Luca say that, Rowu could not help recalling the battle he had just gone through with Laude. The scene was still vivid in his head, and maybe she was right. "But Rowu, there's something important I need to tell you. Do you know what a mystic art is?" Luca then explained slowly. "A mystic art is a prana-exclusive ability that only a small number of races can wield. But bloodline alone isn't enough. It also requires the right talent to match it. Many top-ranked powerhouses possess mystic arts, and Laude is no exception. He's a warrior of the Brovord tribe. The Brovord tribe is a race born for battle, and they've long lived in the southern Water Ridge region. That tribe often passes down its traditions through oral poetry within the clan, and that is their mystic art. And mystic arts aren't only tied closely to bloodline. Trying to acquire one later in life without it is practically impossible. That's what makes them so special. And according to Laude, he seemed to sense the presence of a mystic art in you. Rowu, did you know you might have talent in that area?" Hearing that, Rowu could not help recalling the images from his dream. He stayed silent for a moment before answering in a dazed voice. "I think maybe that's true." The moment he said it, Luca became even more certain that Rowu possessed something truly unusual. But a mystic art is an extremely rare gift. As long as you grow steadily, you'll definitely become a top-tier powerhouse someday. And I've already found an extremely high-paying commission for you. It's an ecological investigation request for Ezaban Forest. 2 months ago, that forest was officially listed as Danger Zone number 48. Hearing that, Rowu asked, "So this is just about investigating the animals in the forest or something?" Luca shook her head. "Not even close. People have been disappearing in that forest one after another lately. Even adventurers who accepted the same commission have vanished without a trace. It's not just ordinary adventurers ranked below 1,000. Even elite adventurers around rank 800 haven't escaped it. If you can uncover the truth behind those disappearances, I estimate your ranking could jump by at least 200 places. Of course, the danger attached to this commission is just as high." The moment he heard that it could raise his ranking by 200 spots, Rowu accepted the commission without the slightest hesitation. Then he looked at Luca and asked, "You recommended this mission to me because you think I can actually handle it, didn't you?" Luca paused for a second, then smiled. "Of course. Since when did you suddenly get smart? Anyway, I still need to finish all the acceptance procedures for you. And one more thing. There's a restricted area in Azaban Forest where hunting animals is forbidden. With me here, the paperwork side won't be too big a problem, but Ro-Woo, you still need to be careful. Don't let your guard down. Hearing that, Ro-Woo asked, then what happens if someone breaks those rules? Luca's tone instantly turned serious. If you violate them, your ranking will take a major hit. No matter how strong you are, you can't just destroy the ecosystem however you want. And if you keep failing commissions, your rating as an adventurer will crash too. Rankings are the foundation of an adventurer's credibility in this world. So Ro-Woo, you absolutely cannot take that lightly. After Luca finished taking care of every last acceptance procedure for the commission, she looked at Ro-Woo and said, this mission is going to be our new starting point. And for you, it'll be the very first step toward climbing the adventurer rankings. So from here on out, let's give it everything we've got. Hearing that, a faint smile finally appeared on Ro-Woo's usually blank and absent-minded face. At the same time, deep in another part of the forest, a man casually crushed an adventurer's throat in one hand. Right after that, another voice called out, you killed another one? But the man only replied indifferently, trash rank nobodies like this aren't worth mentioning, even in a certification nation. At the end of the day, all those idiots who keep trying to climb the rankings through honest effort are fools. If I sell this little thing's horn, I can jump straight into the triple digits. So why wouldn't I do it? Exactly. Mindless hard work alone will never raise your adventurer ranking. Someone like me is the real shortcut to climbing fast. The one who said that was none other than Crueler, ranked number 76 on the smuggling rankings. The other man gave a cold laugh. There's no way I, Darkhan, am giving up a hunting ground this good. I'm the kind of man who plans to jump from rank 672 straight into the top 100. Not long after, Ro-Woo and Luca also arrived at the mission area. The guard stationed there stepped forward first and checked Ro-Woo's personal information. After confirming that he was ranked number 2728 on the adventurer rankings, the guard gave them permission to enter. But what truly caught Ro-Woo's curiosity at that moment was something else. How many people are actually on the adventurer rankings? Hearing that, Luca explained, roughly 30,000 are registered, but the number of truly active adventurers is probably only around 20,000. Even so, compared to the other rankings, it's still massive. That's because the adventurer rankings are on an entirely different level from the others. Ro-Woo asked in a low voice. So I can look at it like this, right? Luca nodded. Exactly. For example, if you're only in the 4 digits on the adventurer rankings, then on another list, that usually translates to someone in the 3 digits. And that's exactly why the adventurer rankings carry so much weight. The people ranked in the triple digits, they're basically the equivalent of double-digit monsters on other lists. They're far stronger than the 2 people you met during the exam. After hearing Luca's explanation, Ro-Woo understood even more clearly just how long the road ahead of him really was. But while Ro-Woo was growing more serious, Luca was practically full of energy. After walking for a while, the two finally reached the danger sector of Azaban Forest, the area ranked number 48 on the danger zone list. At that moment, Luca looked up at Ro-Woo's tense face and asked, what is it? Ro-Woo answered quietly, I can feel it. This isn't an ordinary forest. Luca nodded. That's right, Ro-Woo. Your senses are sharp. They say that a seasoned adventurer only needs one glance to tell how dangerous a piece of land really is. Ordinary people can't sense that at all. That's why the danger zone rankings exist in the first place. 2 months ago, Azaban Forest had not even been on the danger zone list yet. The reason it made its way into the rankings was actually simple. A massive monster tide had broken out there. But the second Luca finished saying that, a small pack of monsters came rushing straight at them. Ro-Woo reacted instantly. He shoved Luca aside and told her to stay behind him. In the very next moment, he shot forward like an arrow loosed from a bow and unleashed several streaks of green light. Then his eyes swept across the surroundings, locking onto every possible monster he might have missed. Right after that, he found the perfect opening and unleashed a gale slash with precise timing. In an instant, the monsters were cut apart into pieces. After the fight, Luca could not help asking, Ro-Woo, was that technique just now something Adore taught you too? Ro-Woo nodded. I did learn several techniques from Adore, but there are still plenty of moves I can't use yet. Still, judging from how things feel now, I think I'll be able to use the second one soon. But Luca immediately frowned. The Blood Beastman is a monster ranked 126 on the danger scale, Ro-Woo. Are you sure you can handle that? Ro-Woo only answered calmly. It's fine. I actually wanted to test that technique anyway. With that, he swung at the Beastman in front of him with the secret art known as Lotus. But to everyone's shock, the move Ro-Woo unleashed did absolutely nothing to it. The whole flashy display was so pointless that even the Beastman stood there frozen for a second. Even Ro-Woo himself had not expected that the technique he used would be this unrefined. But before he had time to think any further, the Beastman flew into a rage and charged at them. The moment they saw that, both of them turned and ran. While fleeing, Luca could not help snapping. Wasn't that way too reckless? Ro-Woo answered under his breath. I thought the move would work. But there's no time to dwell on it now. We need to run. But after sprinting for a while, the two of them suddenly found themselves driven to the edge of a cliff. Even then, Rowu did not hesitate for a second. He grabbed Luca with one arm, then slammed his foot against the ground and launched both of them high into the air. In that instant, the sudden sensation of freefall left Luca so shocked that she nearly questioned reality itself. 2.5 seconds later, the two of them landed safely on the ground, but Luca still had not recovered from the scare. She immediately shouted at him, "What exactly were you thinking, Rowu? If you were going to do that, couldn't you at least warn me first?" Rowu could only answer awkwardly, "Sorry. Most of Ador's training was like that, so it kind of became a habit." Luca looked even more speechless after hearing that. "Seriously though, Rowu, what kind of training did you even go through before this?" But this time, Rowu did not answer, because the scene in front of him had completely stopped him cold. A moment later, he slowly asked, "Luca, where exactly are we in the forest right now?" Hearing that, Luca gave a small smile. "We actually got pretty lucky, because this is the exact area we were sent to investigate." Once Azabon Forest was designated a danger zone, the ecological survey of the entire forest had to be started over. About 80% of it has been completed so far, but the final 20% is still unfinished. And this place is exactly that missing section. But this is also where the monster outbreak first erupted. So Rowu, you need to be especially careful here. Hearing that, Rowu barely paid attention to Luca's warning. Instead, he found himself completely drawn in by the unfamiliar plants and animals in front of him, because to him, everything here was something entirely new. It was only at that moment that Rowu truly understood what an adventure really was. This was the very world Yuna had once described to him that afternoon, with her eyes full of longing. So this was the adventure Yuna had always wanted. But just then, a sudden figure cut straight through his thoughts. Rowu instinctively reached for the weapon at his waist, only for Luca to step in front of him first. Frowning, Rowu asked, "What exactly is that strange creature? Shouldn't I take it down?" Luca hurriedly stopped him. "Don't even think about it. That little one is called a royal horn. It's a level 4 rare wild species that's on the brink of extinction, and just looking at those wounds hurts. Leave this to me." Rowu still sounded uncertain. "Can you really treat its injuries?" Luca answered right away. "Rankers get hurt all the time, so I learned basic medical treatment a long time ago. Besides, when you got injured by Lade, wasn't I the one who gave you first aid? Honestly, I think we should just set up a temporary camp here for today. As a certifier, I can't just leave this little guy behind." Rowu nodded. "All right, I understand what you mean." Luca then added on purpose, "And protecting a royal horn also counts as part of the ecological investigation, so don't get the wrong idea." Rowu simply nodded. "It's fine, Luca. I understand." Before long, night had completely swallowed the forest, and a warm campfire was burning beside Luca. Leaning against the injured royal horn, she slowly closed her eyes and drifted into deep sleep. On the other hand, Rowu remained alone in the clearing, training by himself. His mind was fixed on only one thing: figuring out exactly what had gone wrong with the move he used earlier that day. With that thought in mind, he raised his hand once more and carefully unleashed Lotus again. But even after smashing into the tree trunk head-on, the attack still showed none of the effect it was supposed to have. The result filled him with a sharp wave of frustration and disappointment. He could not help thinking back to the earlier battle, and to Lade's warning, never underestimate the adventurer rankings. Even now, Rowu still felt that he had achieved no real growth at all. At his current level, he was nowhere near worthy of setting foot on the island of the gods. But no matter what, he had to keep pushing himself with everything he had and become stronger. With that thought, Rowu slowly rose to his feet. Right after that, he began seriously thinking over what Luca had said before, because during that earlier battle, Lade had already sensed that some kind of special mystic art seemed to be sleeping inside him. In the blink of an eye, morning arrived. Then, all of a sudden, an urgent voice reached Rowu's ears. He immediately got up and hurried over, asking Luca what had happened. Luca, clearly flustered, said, "I don't know what's wrong with this little one, but it suddenly became restless and agitated for no reason at all." Rowu quickly asked, "What about its injuries?" Luca answered at once. "Royal horns naturally have incredibly strong recovery ability. As long as the treatment is done properly, their wounds heal very quickly. But it's still just a baby. Normally, they're supposed to be very friendly toward humans. The fact that it's this wary now makes me think its injuries were most likely caused by people." "Rowu, lower your head and take a close look at this little one's horn. There are obvious scrape marks on it. It looks like it was attacked by poachers before." A royal horn's horn is considered a legendary cure-all, which is why humans used to capture them on a massive scale. That's also what eventually led to them being classified as a rare species. Even though capturing them has long been strictly outlawed, the market demand never disappeared. So even now, people are still secretly hunting them. In the underground world, they're even trafficked illegally under the name unicorn. But the moment Luca finished speaking, The royal horn at her side suddenly became agitated again. It slammed toward Luca in an instant, but luckily Wu reacted fast enough to step in and stop it. Startled, the royal horn immediately spun around and bolted straight toward the depths of the forest. Wu frowned. I think I scared it just now. Should I go after it? Luca answered right away. Of course. Even if its injuries have improved a little, they're nowhere near fully healed. And up to this point, we still don't have any official record of royal horns appearing in Isabon Forest. So tracking it down is part of the ecological investigation itself. The moment he heard that this was directly tied to the mission, Wu decided to chase after it on his own. Even so, Luca hurriedly warned him. There may be poachers hiding somewhere in this forest, so be careful. Hearing that, Wu asked with complete seriousness. Then what should I do if I actually run into poachers? Can beating them raise my adventurer ranking? Luca hesitated for a moment before replying. That depends on how strong they are, but most likely, yes, it can. The instant he heard that, Wu's eyes lit up. Then if I run into poachers, I'll do everything I can to beat as many of them as possible. But the royal horn was moving far too fast, and for a while, Wu could not catch even a glimpse of it. Still, after sprinting deeper into the forest for some time, he faintly picked up movement ahead. Then, all of a sudden, a sharp arrow came flying straight at him. Wu twisted aside on instinct and avoided the shot in one fluid motion. But right after that, another fierce attack came rushing at him. The attacker was even gritting out. I curse you with the worst luck, you filthy poacher. I'm in a really bad mood right now. As he said that, he swung his blade down at Wu once again. In an instant, the two figures crashed into each other amid a violent burst of energy. But at that exact moment, Olda suddenly realized something was off, because the color of Wu's prana was far too familiar. The next second, Olda immediately shouted at the top of his lungs, Stop! Stop right now! Hearing that shout, Wu also started to feel like the person in front of him did look vaguely familiar. But when he turned and looked up at Eddie standing in the tree, his face filled with confusion. You two, what were your names again? The second those words came out, both Olda and Eddie froze on the spot, and the same thought exploded through their heads at once. Does this guy only have a 5-second memory? As it turned out, the day after the adventurer registration exam ended, Olda was preparing to take on a new commission when a staff member stepped forward and asked what kind of ranking-related service he wanted to process. Right at that moment, Eddie came hurrying over with panic written all over his face. Olda knew exactly what that meant, because if this guy looked that shaken, then something had definitely happened. The next instant, the two of them locked eyes, both widening their eyes in shock at the exact same time. Then, in the very next second, they both looked away just as quickly, as if it had been planned. But it did not take long before neither of them could hold out any longer, and they finally asked why the other was there. After staring at each other for 2.5 awkward seconds, Eddie was the first to let out a heavy sigh. Then he asked Olda, Did you look into that swordsman who beat us? Olda's expression darkened. I checked a long time ago. I found nothing useful. You probably won't believe this, but up to now, that guy doesn't seem to have entered any proper ranking system at all. Hearing that, Eddie clenched his jaw and said, I'm supposed to be a recognized genius in the archery rankings, and yet I got completely crushed by some nobody who didn't even have a ranking. My pride got stomped flat. Listening to that, Olda was instantly dragged back to the scene of his return to the mercenary corps. Back then, every single one of his men had been looking at him with sky-high expectations, and one of them had even excitedly said that now they could finally start expanding their range of operations. Another had laughed and said, There's no way our captain didn't utterly wreck the other candidates. And someone else had chimed in right after, Obviously, the real hard part for the boss is probably holding back enough not to cripple somebody by accident. Every one of them believed that a mercenary ranked in the triple digits could never lose to some rookie who had only just registered. But every one of those words stabbed Olda right in the chest, because none of them knew just how ugly and humiliating that loss had been, especially since it had been 2 against 1. But from start to finish, that guy had not even bothered to look at him properly. In Wu's eyes, Olda had been nothing more than some ordinary stepping stone that did not matter at all. The moment that thought hit him, Olda gave the order on the spot. Starting tomorrow, everyone's training gets tripled. His men were immediately stunned. Captain, but you're already registered on the adventurer rankings now. From here on out, we can take commissions we never could before. Hearing that, Olda clenched his fist so hard his knuckles nearly cracked, then said through gritted teeth, That's still nowhere near enough. This world is far bigger than we ever imagined, and I need to start training seriously all over again. From that point on, Olda's pride had been shattered just as badly. He had never cared about the adventurer rankings before, but now, for the first time in his life, he felt a crushing kind of pressure he had never known. Just like that, Eddie ranked 6725 on the adventurer rankings, and Olda ranked 6301. Both set the same goal for themselves, defeat Wu. Meanwhile, Wu's current rank was 2728, leaving a gap of nearly 4,000 places between them. Still, that gap is only temporary. Since we're aiming for the same thing, we might as well take on the same commission together. There's that forest that got added to the danger zone list recently, right? Azabon Forest. The more dangerous the area, the easier it usually is to raise your rank. But who could have guessed the two of them would run straight into Ro-Woo in that very place? For a moment, both of their faces were full of awkwardness they could not hide. Ro-Woo, on the other hand, was wearing a completely serious expression, his eyes sharp and tense. Just as the three of them were locked in that strange standoff, a sudden noise abruptly cut through the moment. Ro-Woo lowered his eyes and thought for only a split second before making his decision. In the next moment, he tightened his grip on his sword and shot forward like an arrow released from a bow. At the same time, Eddie rushed up behind him and said, "An injured royal horn just appeared. I'm guessing poachers are after it. You're trying to protect that magical creature too, right? But it's moving insanely fast right now." When moving through a forest, the best way to speed up is to use the rise and fall of the terrain. The moment he finished speaking, Eddie burst forward and instantly pulled ahead of Ro-Woo. But Ro-Woo clearly had no intention of falling behind and accelerated right after him. At that moment, the royal horn was under attack by a vicious magical beast. In the blink of an eye, the two of them reached the monster's location. Ro-Woo said in a low voice, "If we can't keep chasing, then we should just land a killing blow right now." But the royal horn was tightly bound by the creature's tentacles, completely unable to move. Seeing that, neither of them dared to attack recklessly, afraid they would hit it by mistake. But right then, a voice suddenly rang out, telling them to first create an opening to strike. That voice instructed Eddie to aim for the monster's eyes, while Ro-Woo was told to move at high speed, draw the monster's full attention, and then wait for the right moment to strike its legs. Right then, Ro-Woo's figure suddenly blurred. In the next instant, a razor-sharp slash tore through the air. At the same time, Olda shouted, "Ro-Woo, grab the royal horn and move!" The moment those words fell, Ro-Woo scooped up the royal horn without hesitation and dashed off to the side. In that very instant, Olda threw everything he had into it and brought his blade down in one all-out strike. The massive tree beside them was cut clean through in a single blow. Then, with a thunderous crash, the falling tree slammed straight down onto the monster and pinned it to the ground, leaving it unable to move. Right after that, Olda looked at Eddie with open pride and said, "See that? Commanding the battlefield is what I do best." Eddie immediately shot back with a look of disgust. "Keep dreaming. I'm not your subordinate." But as Ro-Woo watched the two of them slowly walk over, he could not help recalling the words he had heard before. If he really wanted to break into the top 10 of the adventurer rankings, then no matter how gifted he was with the sword, swordsmanship alone would never be enough. At that moment, Ro-Woo made up his mind completely. He needed to learn far more than just swordsmanship. Meanwhile, Luca came hurrying over through the forest grass, breathing hard as she called out with guilt written all over her face. "Ro-Woo, sorry, I'm late." But the second she saw the scene in front of her, she could not help blurting out, "What exactly happened here?" Ro-Woo answered, "At first, I mistook them for poachers. Luckily, we cleared up the misunderstanding in time." Luca touched her chin and thought for a second. Even if it was a misunderstanding, suddenly attacking someone still isn't something trivial. Then she turned to Olda and Eddie and said, "I'm putting today's incident into the ranking records. I'll let it slide this time. But if either of you pull something like that again, I won't be this lenient." The moment they heard that, both men broke out in a cold sweat and hurriedly promised there would not be a next time. A little later, Olda leaned in close to Ro-Woo and whispered, "Why do you keep dragging a certifier around with you everywhere? Sure, it makes raising your rank easier, but the price is that someone will always be watching you. And there's no profession less flexible than a certifier. Just running back and forth between villages and wastelands wastes entire days. At the end of the day, you're nothing more than a pawn they use however they want." Do you know why certifiers are all desperate to become personal certifiers? Because that's the only way they can make a name for themselves. They climb by updating other people's ranks. For someone like them, a guy like you who can rise fast is the perfect tool. So be careful. That woman's probably just planning to use you as a stepping stone to climb higher herself. Hearing that, Ro-Woo quietly repeated the words under his breath. Make a name for herself. But when he thought back on it, Luca had also looked at him with those same unwavering eyes and said she had something she absolutely had to accomplish. Ro-Woo found himself looking at her again, thinking that maybe she really was not the kind of person Olda and Eddie had made her out to be. Meanwhile, Luca was still murmuring to herself, "The royal horn should be safe now, right?" But the second she said that, the royal horn suddenly appeared behind her and gently rubbed against her. Luca immediately smiled. "Looks like it's really grown attached to you." Ro-Woo replied, "Rather than attached to me, it probably just thinks this is the only safe place left." Luca shot the other two an annoyed look. "That's because of the way you two act. Of course it's scared. Honestly, you ungrateful idiots aren't cute at all." Ro-Woo looked down at the royal horn and said calmly, "Right now, it's just afraid of the atmosphere in this place. And come to think of it, it's been on edge this whole time. So it probably really is reacting to the strange monsters showing up in this forest. I've never seen a creature like that before. It should normally live somewhere much colder. At that, Luca's eyes sharpened. Exactly. Azabon Forest has never had any confirmed record of that kind of monster before. Wu, let's record the existence of that creature too. Then she turned toward Olda and Eddie. We came to this forest because we accepted an ecological investigation commission. What about you two? The two of them answered right away. Pretty much the same. We just came because we received a commission directly from the certification bureau. But the instant she heard the word commission, Luca visibly froze for a moment, because she knew very well that there were hardly any Azaban-related commissions specifically meant for mercenaries and archers. It did not take her long to put the pieces together. Judging by their reactions, the two of them had most likely accepted an adventurer ranking-related commission because Wu had pushed them into it without even realizing it. Thinking that, Luca gently reached out and stroked the royal horn's head, telling herself silently, Wu, you need to pull yourself together too. Then she raised her Netlink terminal and said with a bright smile, Oh right, Wu, I've got good news for you. Your swordsmanship ranking has been updated. That sword saint-style technique you used earlier was so fast it caused a huge reaction and the application already got approved. The screen clearly displayed Wu's updated information. Adventurer ranking 27-28 and swordsmanship ranking jumping straight from 58 all the way to 26. Luca said excitedly, A jump like that is practically unheard of. So, are you happy? Of course Wu was happy, but inside, he could not help thinking that from the ground, the kind of move should have been almost impossible to fully read. And yet, she still saw through it. A certifier really was something else. Outwardly, however, Wu just stood there in silence without answering right away. Seeing that, Luca tilted her head in confusion. What's wrong? Wu looked straight at her and said seriously, You're an amazing certifier. The moment he said that, Luca's face turned red, and she even let out two soft little laughs. Then she lifted her chin with visible pride. Now you finally get how amazing I am as a certifier, don't you? Right then, after hearing their exchange, Olda could not help growing curious about Wu's current rankings. Hearing that, Luca raised her Netlink terminal and looked at Wu. Can I show them? Wu simply gave a quiet nod. The next second, Olda and Eddie immediately leaned in. The moment they saw Wu's current rankings, the jealousy and envy on their faces became impossible to hide. But while looking at that scene, Wu's eyes suddenly sharpened a little. Then he looked at the three of them and said seriously, There's something I want to say. I want to learn from you. I want to learn abilities beyond swordsmanship. The moment he said that, Eddie froze for a second before blurting out, So, up until now, you really have only trained with the sword? Wu nodded. The way you moved through the forest earlier helped me a lot, especially using the slope of the terrain to gain speed while moving through the woods. That really is the best method. Even Eddie looked surprised. Still, I honestly didn't expect you to keep up with my movement after seeing it just once. Then Wu turned toward Olda. And your commands were precise too. Olda crossed his arms and replied like it was only natural. That's just something that got carved into me from standing where I do. Whether I look the part or not, I'm still the captain of a mercenary corps. And if I'm the captain, then even if it's just to keep my men from dying pointlessly, I need to build the strategy properly. In team combat, formation and order matter most. Who stands where? Who draws pressure? Who lands the finishing blow? All of that has to be planned in advance. Even then, Olda could not help asking one more question. But seriously, why are you even interested in this stuff? Your swordsmanship is already ridiculous. You shouldn't need our techniques at all. Wu answered without the slightest hesitation. No, I do need them. Teach me more. The moment those words left his mouth, Olda and Eddie exchanged a look, both clearly stunned. Then Eddie spoke first. If that's how it is, then the first thing you need to learn about moving in a forest is how to read and use all 5 senses. I'll start by teaching you the basics and how to coordinate movement from the front and rear. Off to the side, Luca gently stroked the royal horn's head, thinking to herself that Wu really was starting to change. Making him fight Laude had been the right call after all. But just then, her pupils suddenly tightened, as if she had sensed something wrong. What exactly was happening with those unknown monsters that should never have appeared in Azaban Forest? There were far too many unknown variables here now. This commission might turn into a massive crisis for all of them. At the same time, strange ripples spread through the surrounding space, making it clear that someone was hiding nearby and watching their every move. Funny, I came here looking for that runaway unicorn, and instead, I ran into you little brats. Hearing that, Kruller adjusted his monocle and said with a grin, Those little creatures are valuable merchandise. No matter how you look at it, the organs are still fresh. They'll sell for a high price. The instant those words fell, a vicious grin spread across Darkin's face. Now that you've stepped into a hunter's territory, don't expect to walk out of here in one piece. At that moment, Eddie explained to Wu, Trying to sharpen all five senses and use them precisely in a forest has never been easy. It's not just about sight and hearing. If you want to truly bring front and rear awareness into a real fight, then you need a huge amount of training, and this forest just happens to be the perfect place for that. The air here is packed with overlapping scents from plants and animals. For mercenaries who are used to reading more straightforward battlefield cues, that kind of environment can actually make things harder, but I can still tell exactly how many animals are moving within a few meters of me. Ro-woo, try using your prana to support your senses. At the end of the day, prana is just a kind of flowing energy. If you focus your attention on the direction you want to search, you'll start picking up abnormalities around you. Hearing that, Ro-woo slowly closed his eyes and kept telling himself to focus completely. In the next second, a massive surge of green energy erupted from his body. The others beside him froze for a moment, visibly shaken by the sudden burst. That energy was overwhelming, yet Ro-woo kept his eyes shut and used that surging force to slowly learn how to predict and sense everything around him. But while Ro-woo was pouring all his attention into the forest around him, a figure at the top of the cliff was already staring straight down at them. Hidden in the shadows, Darkin wore a savage grin, his eyes burning with the madness of a hunter who had locked onto prey. At the same time, Ro-woo's pupils shrank. He had caught that malicious gaze with pinpoint accuracy. In an instant, he tightened his grip on the sword at his waist, every muscle in his body tensing as he snapped into combat readiness. Seeing how suddenly tense Ro-woo had become, Luca also looked at him in confusion. But at that exact moment, a fist wrapped in violet energy came crashing straight toward Ro-woo's face. The terrifying force exploded on impact, and the shockwave launched Ro-woo clear through the air. The others nearby were so stunned by the sudden attack that they all cried out his name at once. By the time the dust settled, Ro-woo was already covered in wounds and had crashed hard onto the ground. Darkin threw his head back and laughed. He sneered that he had not even known where they were hiding, but that wild burst of prana had ended up exposing their position for him. At the same time, Ulda and Eddie instantly entered battle stance as well, gripping their weapons tightly, their eyes filled with suspicion toward the unknown man before them. Luca's pupils were locked entirely on that figure too, and for a brief moment, her whole body froze. Then she rushed forward and loudly stopped the two of them from making a move against him, because she knew exactly who he was. Darkin, ranked number 672 on the adventurer rankings. The moment they heard that rank, Ulda and Eddie both went pale. The man in front of them was a triple-digit ranker, someone whose strength far surpassed theirs. Darkin narrowed his eyes and smirked. "So you know who I am?" Luca hurriedly answered. "Your name is infamous in our circles, and your previous rank used to be in the double digits. It was only because you committed one unforgivable crime after another that you were dragged all the way down into the triple digits." Just then, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed out, and a cane slowly came to a stop in front of the group. A moment later, the newcomer spoke with a trace of helplessness. "Darkin, you really do move too fast." Then his gaze landed on Luca, and there was even a flicker of surprise in his voice. "Oh? There's actually a certifier here too." But to everyone's surprise, Luca immediately called out his name. Hearing that, the old man raised an eyebrow. Luca let out a quiet gasp. You're a powerhouse ranked number 76. Kruller looked genuinely surprised as well. He clearly had not expected Luca to even know about the criminal rankings. The so-called criminal rankings, also known as the criminal sequence, are a system used to measure the severity of a criminal's offenses and overall danger level. Some of the more infamous branches include the serial killer rankings and the theft rankings. The higher someone stands on those lists, the worse their crimes, and the crueler their methods tend to be. Criminal rankings themselves are one type of unofficial ranking. In this world, there are many systems that exist without formal certification, even though some of them occasionally reach a very high standard and may be briefly referenced or borrowed by official institutions. Those cases are rare. Most of them are not recognized at all. Right then, Darkin's eyes suddenly shifted toward the royal horn, and raw greed flared up inside them. In his mind, he was practically roaring. After all this time, I finally found it. Seeing that, Luca did not hesitate for even a second. She rushed forward and spread her arms in front of the royal horn. Then she demanded sharply, "Why are you working with a man like that?" Darkin only gave a careless shrug. "Isn't it obvious? Money." Luca gritted her teeth. "You actually teamed up with someone that vicious just for money. With your strength, you could have earned it the proper way." But Darkin's face suddenly darkened, and he cut her off coldly. "Mind your own business. Money was never all I wanted." Then he flatly revealed the two reasons he had joined forces with the other man. First, to sell goods to him. Second, to buy something I want from him. The moment she heard that, Luca froze in place, sweat beginning to form on her forehead. In the next second, Darkin's whole face twisted into something vicious. Luca shot back angrily. "So that's what rankings mean to you? That as long as you're ruthless enough, you can take any place you want? You've gone too far. How dare you insult the very meaning of rankings right in front of a certifier? At that moment, Olda suddenly tightened his grip on his blade and slashed hard at Darkin from behind. But Darkin casually lifted one hand and caught the blade between two fingers. At the same time, Eddie instantly drew his bow to full tension. "We accepted a patrol commission for Azabon Forest," he shouted. "A dangerous criminal like you is the last person I can afford to ignore." A deeply impatient look spread across Darkin's rugged face. He muttered under his breath, "You're all so damn noisy." In an instant, violet energy erupted from his body. A heartbeat later, the force shattered Olda's blade to pieces. Then Darkin turned and drove a vicious punch straight down toward Olda's head. In that moment, Olda froze completely. His mind was left with only 3 words: "I'm going to die." But right at that razor-thin line between life and death, a figure shot forward at a speed too fast for the eye to properly follow. In the next instant, 2 terrifying forces collided head-on and blocked Darkin's killing blow by sheer force. Caught off guard by that sudden interception, Darkin's face changed instantly, and for the first time, real shock showed in his eyes. Ro-Wu, on the other hand, looked terrifyingly calm. Staring straight at him, he said one word at a time: "Now, it's my turn." 2 overwhelming forces crashed into each other head-on, but neither side let up for even a second. Their violent energies kept grinding against one another in a full-force clash. Ro-Wu tightened his grip on the blade, lowered his body, and burst forward, his eyes blazing with unshakable fighting spirit. At the same time, savage violet mist churned around Darkin's body, making him look like a beast waiting for the exact moment to lunge in for the kill. Off to the side, Luca finally let out the breath she had been holding the moment she saw that Ro-Wu was still alive. Then Ro-Wu asked in a low voice, "This guy? He's one of the poachers, isn't he?" Hearing that, all the clues Luca had gathered flashed through her mind at once, and she finally became certain that he was exactly the man she had been tracking. The moment those words were spoken, Ro-Wu's eyes lit up. His sword was already wrapped in a sharp green glow, and the power gathering in the strike reached completion in that instant. In the next second, he carved a fierce arc through the air and unleashed a full-powered whirlwind slash, the violent blade light driving straight at Darkin's face. A breath later, Ro-Wu steadied his stance again, and even with the green light still surging around him, his will to fight had not dropped in the slightest. But no one could have expected Darkin to catch that supposedly lethal blow with his bare hand. Even he seemed stunned that the boy in front of him could actually wield prana. Ro-Wu was just as shaken. He had never imagined his opponent's defense could be that monstrous. His full-force attack had done nothing. And in that brief daze, his thoughts were dragged straight back into the past. Adore had once warned him with absolute seriousness: when you face someone who can truly control prana, be careful beyond reason. The fact that you can use prana at all makes you an abnormal case. For ordinary people, the only way to awaken that power is to become a true master in a specific field, whether it's the sword, the blade, or any other weapon. Only by pouring everything into it and honing it to the absolute extreme can you awaken the dormant force inside you. That is the true nature of prana. The instant those words had ended, Adore had slammed his palm into a stone wall, and the power surging from his body flowed directly into solid matter. In other words, anyone who can truly sense and wield prana is a master who has survived countless real battles. In the next instant, the entire rock wall had shaken violently. And now, as Darkin planted his feet on the ground one steady step at a time, Ro-Wu's gaze lifted, almost as if he were once again looking up toward that high stone wall. In the glow of the setting sun, Adore's figure in that memory still stood with overwhelming presence, and the enemy now standing before him was most likely a top grandmaster in some field as well. By the time Ro-Wu fully came back to himself, his mind had cleared in an instant, and he finally understood just how terrifying this opponent was. The realization made every muscle in his body tighten for battle. But just then, Luca cried out sharply, "Ro-Wu, be careful! His boxing ranking is number 12! The moment he heard that, a cold bead of sweat slid down Ro-Wu's cheek, and his heart dropped. He's also ranked number 48 as a beast tamer, and number 19 in grip strength. And even worse, his weightlifting ranking is number 7 in the world. Luca immediately shouted a warning. "So don't let him drag you into close-range power fighting. This man is world-class, all the way through." At the same time, as Dalkin listened to the girl rattle off his information one piece after another, irritation spread across his face, and he clicked his tongue in annoyance. At a time like this, having some little recorder standing nearby is seriously irritating. The instant he said that, he slammed a hand against the trunk of the tree beside him, his expression turning dark as he clearly decided to get rid of Luca first. The moment she saw that, Luca's face turned deathly pale, her eyes filling with raw disbelief and fear. Then Dalkin actually hoisted the entire massive tree onto one shoulder with one hand and began walking toward her step by step. In the next second, murderous intent twisted across his face, and he attacked without hesitation. In an instant, the giant tree shot forward like a cannon shell, and the violent blast of air it dragged with it swept through the entire area. But just as the shadow of death was about to swallow Luca whole, Rowu suddenly lunged in front of her, swinging his sword with everything he had and blocking that fatal attack head-on. Even so, the force behind it was far beyond what he had imagined. Rowu had to pour every ounce of strength in his body into resisting the crushing weight of the tree. At the same time, although Luca had narrowly escaped death, her face was still filled with panic and worry, and in front of her, Rowu was already gasping for breath, his stamina clearly draining at an alarming rate. But right then, another figure suddenly appeared before them. With only a single glance at Rowu, he coldly remarked that the boy's aura was obviously unusual. Then he directly ordered Dalkin to capture Rowu alive, adding with certainty that the boy would sell for a very high price. Hearing that, the killing intent in Dalkin's eyes surged even higher, and with a savage grin, he declared that he would take the brat down exactly as planned. What they did not realize, however, was that up on the trunks among the trees, Eddie had already drawn his bow to full tension and was waiting for the right moment to strike. In the next second, Eddie released the string, and several arrows tore through the air toward Dalkin. But when the arrows came flying in, Dalkin did not even bother to lift his eyelids. His expression did not change in the slightest. Then he clenched his fist and shattered every incoming arrow with his bare hand. Right after that, he sneered with utter contempt. "Trash like you isn't even worth remembering." That sight turned Eddie's face completely pale, his eyes filled with disbelief. Just as the tension reached its peak, Ulda suddenly hurled a smoke bomb straight at Dalkin. As the smoke burst outward in an instant, a shout immediately rang out from within it, telling Rowu to seize the chance and force the bastard back. But instead of working, that move completely enraged Dalkin, and he roared that he would wipe out everyone there. In the very next moment, carrying a near-apocalyptic force, he slammed his fist straight into the ground. Violent energy exploded at once, and the entire earth cracked apart beneath him. When the dust slowly cleared, Dalkin's face was twisted with shock, and he even let out a baffled sound under his breath. Looking carefully, he realized the others were already gone, which made him grit his teeth and curse the fact that they had escaped in the chaos. At the same time, Kruller spoke up in irritation, saying that Dalkin's last move had been far too reckless, and if he himself had gotten caught in it, the whole thing would have been a complete waste. Meanwhile, Rowu and the others were using the chaos to sprint through the forest with everything they had, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and that death trap. While they ran, Ulda could not help praising the group, saying they had all understood his intention perfectly, because there had never been any real chance of overpowering that man with brute force. Eddie admitted just as bluntly that he had already realized the same thing. The best option in that situation had been for everyone to retreat together. At that moment, Rowu kept running with the royal horn in his arms. He did not say a word, but he poured everything he had into keeping up with the other two. Still, in the middle of that chaos, he could not stop thinking about the opponent they had just faced. That man had been monstrously strong, and yet he was only ranked 672 on the adventurer rankings. The thought finally made Rowu realize something for real. This world was far more dangerous and unpredictable than he had ever imagined. But right then, the royal horn in his arms suddenly began to thrash in panic. In the next second, it broke free from Rowu's grasp, and the sudden movement made him cry out in surprise. He immediately tried to calm it down, but the royal horn still let out a low, wary growl at him. Off to the side, the others finally came to a stop as well. After catching her breath, Luca was the first to speak, saying they should be safe for the moment now that they had made it this far. Then she turned toward Rowu and told him that, in truth, they still had one mission left unfinished. "We have to capture the man named Kruller." Hearing that, confusion immediately appeared on Rowu's face, because the name Kruller had not clicked for him yet. So Luca clarified, "Kruller is the bearded man from before." That only made Rowu look at her with even more confusion as he asked why they absolutely had to catch him. Luca answered in a low voice, "Because all of this is tied to the goal I'm chasing." Just then, Ulda stepped in and reminded everyone that the first thing they needed to do was settle on a plan. He then admitted that the commission he and Eddie had accepted was actually a forest patrol assignment, which meant they would continue monitoring those two targets. Luca immediately warned them not to overestimate themselves, because at their current level, they had no chance of defeating those men head-on. Ulda understood that perfectly well, so he said that he only planned to continue observing and would not make any reckless move. "Once we've gathered enough proof of what they've done, we'll report it to the Certification Bureau and leave the rest to the authorities." At that point, Ulda turned back to Luca and asked what kind of outcome that plan would actually lead to if they went through with it. Luca let out a long sigh, her face full of helplessness. But Ulda insisted that even though the reward would vary depending on how credible the information turned out to be, the payment itself would definitely still be delivered as long as the report held up. Seeing that, Luca could only warn them again and again not to do anything reckless, and above all, to avoid a direct fight with those two at all costs. After saying that to Olda and Eddie, she turned back to Ro-Woo and asked what he intended to do next. Ro-Woo gave his answer without hesitation. Right now, all I want is to get the royal horn somewhere safe. Olda nodded and said that Ro-Woo's thinking made sense. As long as the royal horn was still with them, any real fight would force them to hold back. But Ro-Woo immediately cut them off and said that was not what he meant. What I really mean is that I don't want this child getting dragged into something this dangerous. As those words fell, Ro-Woo slowly reached out and gently touched the little creature's horn. Seeing that, Luca quickly reached out as well, gently soothing the royal horn beside her, her voice low and full of guilt. Once everyone had calmed down a little, it became clear that from this point on, they would have to split up for a while. At that moment, Olda raised a hand and pointed toward a large tree in the distance, setting it as their rendezvous point. Once you two get the royal horn somewhere safe, come back here and meet us. Ro-Woo, however, still looked confused. Even if we regroup later, what are we planning to do after that? Olda answered in a low voice. This is just leaving ourselves an extra option. There is a good chance we will need each other's strength again. At the same time, Eddie immediately picked up the conversation and said that before splitting up, he wanted to teach Ro-Woo as much as he could about moving through the forest. Olda, on the other hand, was worried that if they dragged things out too long, they might completely lose Dalkin's trail. But Eddie did not seem concerned, telling him to head out first. Still, to everyone's surprise, Olda eventually decided to stay a little longer as well and teach Ro-Woo more strategy related to real combat. The moment that was settled, Eddie immediately took Ro-Woo and began practical training on movement through the forest. At the same time, Olda also passed on the combat experience he had accumulated over the years, almost without holding anything back. After training like that for a while, Ro-Woo admitted that he had truly gained a lot of new insight from it. Then Olda added one more thing on purpose. Before making a real move, build the action in your head first. That kind of image training raises your chances of success by a lot. After saying goodbye to the two of them, Luca smiled and said, "Next, let us focus on taking this little one somewhere safe. Once it is settled, the ecological investigation in Azaban can start properly again." After saying that, she stepped closer to Ro-Woo and asked whether he understood what she really meant by that. Ro-Woo simply gave a quiet response and nodded. "I trust Olda and Eddie. Looking at everything together, the two of them really are better than me in certain areas. There is something impressive in the way they fight. So I trust what you said too." Hearing that, Luca raised one finger and made a suggestion with a smile. "Then how about this? We continue the ecological investigation while also helping the royal horn find its home. Because from the very beginning, I have been wondering where this little one actually came from. There is no way it exists alone." Ro-Woo nodded. "That does sound like a good idea. But how are we supposed to find it?" Luca smiled softly. "Simple. We just ask this little one." With the royal horn taking the lead up ahead, the two of them followed right behind. Even so, Ro-Woo could not help feeling doubtful along the way. Luca told him seriously that he needed to trust an animal's instincts. The reason a young creature was so full of fear was precisely because it instinctively wanted to return home. That was the most natural thing in the world. A short while later, the two of them suddenly stopped in place. Luca's expression changed at once. She told Ro-Woo that the creature in front of them was an unidentified magical beast and urged him to record it immediately. Hearing that, Ro-Woo quickly pulled out the notebook he always carried with him. Before long, he had already sketched the beast's appearance into the notebook. Just then, Luca spotted another new target and immediately pointed toward the distance, telling Ro-Woo to record it quickly, and so it continued all the way until dusk. Luca kept discovering one creature after another in the forest, while Ro-Woo patiently kept up with every request she made. Before long, night had fully settled in, and Ro-Woo lit another campfire beneath the trees. Luca and the white wolf had already fallen deeply asleep off to the side, but Ro-Woo quietly got to his feet, slipped away from the firelit camp, and walked alone into the darkest part of the forest. There, he slowly closed his eyes and let out a long breath, and the air around him immediately became steady and still. But in the next instant, the prana surging out of him spread through the surrounding forest like a tide. Right then, a familiar voice suddenly came from behind him, and Ro-Woo turned at once. Under the moonlight, Luca approached with her long hair loose over her shoulders, softly greeting him as she looked at his silhouette. Then Luca asked first whether she had interrupted him. Ro-Woo calmly replied that he was only reviewing the things Eddie had taught him. Hearing that, Luca smiled and lightly waved the notebook in her hand, saying that she had already gone through the investigation notes he had drawn up. There are still parts that are not complete enough though, so let us call those your assignments for later. Objectively speaking, your writing would be better if it were a little more concise. But instead of responding to that, Ro-Woo suddenly brought up what had happened earlier. Looking at Luca, he asked quietly, "Why is Kruller your target? And that so-called goal of yours? Is it really something you absolutely have to do?" Hearing that, Luca tightened her grip around the notebook in her hand and only let out a faint response. Wu continued, "Are you not awake this late too? If you just sit still by yourself, it feels like that fear and tension inside you could burst out at any moment." Luca froze, then stared at him in disbelief and asked, "How can you say something like that so lightly? Is that why you keep training this late every night?" After Wu gave her what was practically a silent confirmation, Luca fell completely quiet, unable to say anything for a while. Only after a long pause did she finally speak again, saying that Wu had no idea what the goal she was chasing actually meant. But Wu answered with simple seriousness, "Even if I do not understand it yet, I can still face it with you." Hearing that, Luca finally made up her mind and chose to tell him about the goal that had haunted her all this time. A ranking is supposed to be something that records outstanding people from top to bottom. That is exactly why people compete with each other. To have your name left behind on a ranking is the clearest proof of your value and your honor. But what if there were a ranking that was the complete opposite? A ranking that starts from the far end of the world and records people in reverse. That ranking is called the worst ranking. And what I have been chasing all this time is the darkness hidden behind it. 5 years ago, Luca had once had someone precious by her side, and that dear friend she had always kept close to her heart was a blind girl named Miliera. From the day she was born, Miliera had never been able to see the world in front of her, and she knew almost nothing about it. Maybe because of that, she never once laughed at Luca's dreams, no matter how distant or impossible they sounded. Back then, Luca would always smile and say that her dream was to become the #1 certifier in the world and carve her own name into history with her own hands. And out of everyone around her, Miliera was the only one who believed in her without reservation. For Luca, whose heart had always held ambitions far beyond the ordinary, school may have always been a place far too small. Then Miliera softly told Luca that her father had mentioned the day before that their whole family had been invited to board a luxury cruise ship not long from now. The moment she heard that, Luca cried out in shock, "Do not tell me it is the Bindrus? That is the newly built top-tier luxury liner." Miliera gave a small nod and then gently said that, if Luca did not mind, she wanted to give her own invitation ticket to her. Luca froze. "Why would you give it to me?" Miliera simply answered in a calm voice, "I cannot see anything anyway. Even if I went, it feels like it would not really mean much." The moment Luca heard those words, her whole body stiffened. In the next second, she shot to her feet and flatly refused Miliera's offer. Then she blurted out that she was absolutely going to board that ship together with her. Before the words had even fully settled, Luca had already reached out and gripped Miliera's hand tightly. "When that time comes, I will hold your hand the whole way, just like I am right now." Hearing that, a gentle smile slowly appeared on Miliera's face, and she said she would go ask her father whether Luca could come with them. Looking at the dearest friend she had in the world, Luca broke into a radiant smile of her own, and soon enough, with the help of Miliera's mother, Luca was able to board the luxury liner Bindrus as well. For Luca, who could never truly fit into school life because her heart was always fixed on bigger dreams, Miliera had been her only real friend, and Luca's sincerity had made Miliera and her family deeply grateful to her in return. But no one had ever expected that. In the blink of an eye, the cruise ship would begin to sink at terrifying speed. Inside the bridge, the crew shouted in panic. The impact from hitting the reef was too severe. More than half the lifeboats are no longer operational. Hearing that, the captain's face turned grim, and he immediately ordered all passengers to gather on the deck. But the people allowed onto the lifeboats would be chosen by him personally. The moment he said that, he reached out and pressed a button on the control panel. Then his hand slowly came to rest on the passenger list, and it was obvious that he had already made his decision. Before long, every passenger had been gathered on deck. In the middle of the crowd, Luca was holding tightly to Miliera's hand while waiting for the list of passengers assigned to the first lifeboat. She even whispered to Miliera not to be afraid, promising that she would stay by her side no matter what. But in the very next instant, the captain called out Luca's name in a loud voice. Right after that, he read off several more names in succession. Luca froze on the spot in utter disbelief, because that was the full list of passengers assigned to the first lifeboat. She could not understand it at all. Why was her name on the list? Hearing that, Miliera only lowered her eyes in silence. In the next second, she slowly let go of Luca's hand and then raised her voice, telling Luca to get on the lifeboat first, insisting that she would be fine. Luca hurriedly tried to object, but Miliera cut her off first. There is no time to hesitate anymore. If we do not cooperate with each other now, then neither of us will survive. I have always believed that you will become the greatest certifier. So this time, you need to believe in me too. The moment Luca reached that part of the story, her eyes instantly filled with tears. And so, after Luca safely reached the shore, the lifeboat immediately turned around and headed back toward the cruise ship. But when it returned, Luca still could not see Miliera anywhere on board. Then the third rescue attempt collapsed entirely. All Luca could do was watch from afar as the cruise ship was swallowed by fire and sank beneath the sea. By then, everything was already too late. At that moment, She fell to her knees, whispering over and over, "That cannot be possible." Meanwhile, some of the crew nearby were muttering with obvious relief. Good thing we did not get back on that ship. At the end of the day, being the one who survives is what counts as luck. People stuck on the worst ranking were always meant to be the ones left behind. But right then, a voice abruptly cut through their words. What exactly does the worst ranking mean? The two crewmen turned pale with shock, clearly never expecting that this child had overheard their conversation. Luca stared straight at them and said coldly, "So this really is something other people are not supposed to know, is it?" Then she forced them to explain everything, warning that if they refused, she would shout the words "worst ranking" out loud in front of everyone right there. The instant she said that, the two men panicked and immediately gave in. They said they would tell her the truth, but only if she promised never to tell the captain. The worst ranking is a list that ranks people based on the extent of their overall disadvantages as human beings. At a glance, it shows where a person stands at the bottom in social, economic, physical, and psychological terms. Hearing that, Rowu asked quietly, "Do you know what a ranking like that is even for? Is it really just there to decide who gets abandoned first when disaster strikes?" Luca took a deep breath and explained slowly. The people who hold and use the worst ranking are usually those with the power to decide life and death. Luxury ship captains, hospital directors, politicians. They use that ranking to decide whose life gets prioritized. And my goal is to erase the worst ranking from this world completely. That ranking is what killed Miliera. I can never forgive something like that. A ranking that pushes people straight into absolute despair should not exist. After hearing that, Rowu said in a low voice, "I think I understand what the worst ranking is now. But what exactly does it have to do with Crueler?" Luca looked up and answered through gritted teeth. To put it simply, whether it is the criminal rankings or the worst ranking, they are both rooted in the same dark system. If we can capture Crueler and force information out of him about the criminal rankings, then maybe I will be able to reach the person who stands at the top of the worst ranking itself. That is exactly why that man has to be captured, no matter what. And politicians and financial elites are probably the real core of it all. The organization behind this is enormous, so huge that I even suspect something like a hidden world-level certification power exists behind it. But right now, that part is still only my guess. Hearing that, Rowu spoke softly. "So you have really been gritting your teeth and carrying all of this alone the whole way. You must have been incredibly lonely. And even so, you never stopped. You just kept moving forward with everything you had. Someone like that is honestly incredible." The moment she heard those words, Luca's eyes widened, and she froze in place. Then she slowly buried her face into her knees, her voice beginning to tremble as it caught in her throat. "If you say things like that at a moment like this, I am really going to cry." Then Luca suddenly lifted her head again and shouted through tears, "It is not fair if I am the only one crying. Rowu, you have to tell me your reason too." Rowu blinked once in surprise, then quietly nodded. "Okay, but I am not going to cry." The moment she heard that, Luca shot back with tearful eyes. "No way. I am definitely going to make you cry. And when I do, you are going to cry your heart out in my arms." After hearing Rowu's story the night before, Luca had completely lost control of her emotions, and no matter what she did, the tears would not stop. She had cried through the entire night, and even now, her eyes were still red, and only now did she finally understand why Rowu was so desperate to reach the island of the gods. He simply wanted to know whether everyone was still alive. But by now, Rowu had also come to understand something himself. Raw passion alone would never get him to the place he truly wanted to reach, and the person who had taught him that truth was Luca. "So from now on, if there is anything I am lacking, I want you to tell me directly." Then Rowu looked at her and made a formal offer. "Luca, become my personal certifier. This time, I mean it." Hearing that, Luca smiled and answered with complete sincerity, "I will not let you down." And just like that, the two of them clasped hands tightly, sealing a promise to walk the same path together. After that, guided by the royal horn, the two of them traveled much deeper without even realizing how far they had come. Looking at the little creature's back as it led the way, Luca quietly murmured, "I hope we can really get it home safely." Royal horns usually live in cave regions. Their kind are incredibly resilient, and they barely need to leave often to hunt, so they normally stay deep inside caves in relative peace. But the moment she finished saying that, the royal horn suddenly stopped in its tracks, its eyes turning sharply alert. In the next second, it bolted forward at full speed, and both of them immediately changed expressions. Without hesitation, they accelerated after it. But after chasing it for a while, both of them froze at the same time, because an enormous spherical boulder-like mass was blocking the entire path ahead. The instant she saw it, something clicked in Luca's mind, and she ran straight toward the side of that giant mass. The moment she got close enough to truly see it, shock spread across her face. "I cannot believe something this rare exists here. And from the looks of it, it has been dead for a long time." At that moment, all the scattered pieces finally came together. "Rowu, Do you know what a mimic beast is? It is a kind of magical creature that disguises itself as part of the environment, then uses treasure or strange phenomena to lure humans in before devouring them. But this one is different. It did not use treasure as bait. It used other magical beasts as bait to lure adventurers closer. It clearly lived in a symbiotic relationship with those beasts, hunting intruders together with them. This kind of creature is also called a living warehouse. As it travels, it carries all kinds of magical beasts inside its own body. Staring at the enormous corpse, Rowu immediately voiced a thought that had just surfaced in his mind. Then, was the royal horn trapped inside it before? Luca nodded and explained. When a mimic beast hunts, it usually releases all of the magical beasts inside it at once to overwhelm its target. But this time, it clearly suffered a backlash. Hearing that, Dalkin's figure flashed through Rowu's mind in an instant. At the same time, Luca took out her recording device and said gravely, "The reason so many magical beasts suddenly appeared in Azaban Forest is most likely because this mimic beast died. The creatures it had stored inside escaped all at once after its death, and that is what caused the forest ecosystem to collapse so violently." Just this alone is enough to support the report. And looking at the wounds on the corpse, these marks were clearly left by other magical beasts feeding on it after it died. Mimic beasts have an extremely close dependency with the creatures that live inside them, which means the thing that killed it in the first place was most likely the rampaging magical beasts already loose in this forest. Hearing that, Rowu slowly walked over to the royal horn. A quiet feeling rose inside him. So it was another pitiful creature that had lost its home. Seeing that, Luca lightly clasped her hands to her chest and softly called Rowu's name. But at that very moment, the ground suddenly began to shake violently, and heavy rumbling sounds rolled through the area one after another. In the next instant, a massive beast man appeared right in front of them. And the moment Luca got a clear look at it, she recognized it at once as the same monster they had encountered before. No sooner had that realization hit than the beastman's eyes turned blood red, and it charged straight at them. Then, without warning, it slammed a heavy fist into the ground. The earth split apart on impact, and shattered stones flew everywhere. But at the exact instant the blow landed, Rowu had already grabbed both Luca and the royal horn and barely slipped out of the way. Right after that, he moved them behind him and took up a guarded stance on his own. But strangely enough, the beastman did not continue attacking. Instead, it reached toward the mimic beast's corpse. In the next second, it started devouring the body with savage hunger. Seeing that, Luca finally realized the truth. The mimic beast had been eaten by this very beastman. But before anyone could react, the royal horn suddenly darted straight toward the monster. Luca hurriedly tried to stop it, but the little creature had already rushed right up to the beastman's legs. The next second, the beastman casually swatted it away with one hand. The royal horn staggered back to its feet, dirt and wounds covering its body. At the same time, Rowu slowly drew his sword and quietly told the little one to stay where it was. Then he locked his eyes onto the beastman in front of him and said in a low voice, "This time, I will deal with it." At that moment, the conversation from earlier surfaced in Rowu's mind again. There was a sword technique he had desperately wanted to bring out properly, but he had failed every time. Eddie had admitted that he did not understand swordsmanship itself. But if Rowu's real problem was losing control whenever he tried to use prana, then the matter was actually much simpler than it looked. I can teach you the prana control method that has been passed down in the Markman family. With your talent, you should pick it up quickly. Thinking back on that, Rowu slowly closed his eyes and began pulling every ounce of power from within himself. In the next instant, he snapped his eyes open. Blinding green light burst from his gaze, and the aura around him surged violently upward. Even now, Eddie's words still echoed inside his head. Next, you need to try using that feeling to embrace yourself. It should feel like you are looking down at your own body from above. Once you manage to experience it even once, you will understand the trick. Especially for someone like you, whose prana keeps spilling out uncontrollably, this method works almost immediately. In the next second, the prana inside Rowu erupted outward, with a level of perception sharp beyond belief. He could almost clearly overlook every single current of power moving inside his own body. Then the energy around him began to surge wildly, as if it might swallow up everything around him. And when he finally got hold of that power for real, Rowu slowly opened his eyes. At last, he had completely taken control of the flow of prana. But right then, the beastman seemed to sense the overwhelming threat coming off Rowu as well, and suddenly turned, walking straight toward him. At the same time, its massive hand came crashing down toward Rowu's head with a violent roar of wind behind it. And yet, Rowu did not move. He simply stood there, gripping his sword with crushing force. In the next second, he poured everything he had into the killing move known as Lotus. As a near-destructive slash came crashing down, the beastman let out a deafening howl. Seeing that, Luca could barely believe it. Rowu had actually succeeded in bringing out the second technique, but the beastman still did not fall. Just as expected, the power of a single strike was nowhere near enough to finish it off. Even so, Rowu's expression did not change in the slightest. In the blink of an eye, a second razor-sharp slash exploded out and struck the monster cleanly. It turned out that Lotus was a special sword technique built around continuously stacking slashes. With every swing, the number of slashes climbed higher and higher at a terrifying rate. Under that endless storm of attacks, the Beastman was soon trapped completely inside the overlapping strikes, able to do nothing but let out a desperate roar. In the end, the mass of energy detonated all at once, and in that very instant, Rowu turned away and calmly sheathed his sword. Watching the whole exchange unfold, Luca could only stare with her mouth slightly open. Once the dust fully cleared, Rowu walked straight toward the royal horn. Then he softly told it not to be afraid and made his feelings clear, saying he was not its enemy. Seeing that scene, Luca could not help feeling moved. At this point, moving together with the royal horn really had become the best possible choice. After all, this forest had grown far too dangerous. The scene shifted. Dalkin had one foot planted on top of the royal horn, coldly telling it to stay still, because no one was coming to save it now. In that moment, he was even considering whether he should just cut the little thing's tongue out, but Kruller immediately stopped him, saying that would ruin the value of the prey. If the merchandise was already damaged from the start, buyers would suspect it was defective, and all of that was being watched clearly by two people hiding in the shadows. Even so, they still did not dare make a reckless move. Right now, the most important thing was still to report everything happening here to the Certification Bureau. But just then, Dalkin suddenly sensed that something was off. After that, he immediately decided to deal with the people hiding in the dark first. The moment they saw that, the two hidden watchers went pale. They realized their position had been completely exposed. Before anyone could say another word, Dalkin burst forward at terrifying speed straight toward them. In the next second, his heavy punch slammed into the tree trunk, and the entire tree exploded into pieces. The sudden strike caught the two of them completely off guard. They had hidden their presence as carefully as they could. So when exactly had they been exposed? Dalkin answered that himself with a sneer. He revealed that demon hawks had already been watching the roads for them. Since they themselves had been hunting for prey all across the area, they already knew every movement taking place nearby. Hearing that, Eddie could not help muttering, "A triple-digit adventurer really is a monster. What makes him terrifying is not just raw strength." The moment he finished speaking, Ulda threw out another smoke bomb. Dalkin did not even bother dodging. He casually lifted a hand and caught the smoke bomb in midair, sneering, "You really think the same trick is going to work twice?" But in the next instant, an arrow shot in with perfect accuracy and struck the smoke bomb dead on. That was enough to send Dalkin into a full rage, roaring that he was going to kill both of them. But Ulda knew very well that simply running like this forever was never going to solve anything. Hearing that, Eddie's eyes sharpened, as if he had finally found a way to break the deadlock. He reached down, grabbed a green leaf from the ground, and understood that right now, the only thing left was to fight for even the slightest increase in their odds of survival. Then he bit through his fingertip hard, smeared the blood across the leaf, and fixed that leaf tightly onto one of his arrows. In the next instant, the arrow shot away into the distance, racing toward its target with incredible speed. Eddie then said in a low voice, "I have done everything I can." But right then, that same familiar and terrifying presence appeared behind them again. Through the smoke, Dalkin wore a mocking, savage grin as he sneered, "You idiots did not even run. But even if you had, it would not matter. I already know this entire terrain by heart." Hearing that, the two of them only gritted their teeth and shot back coldly. "Enough talking. Now, it is our turn," Eddie said in a low voice. "An archer can only bring out their real strength when they have cover to work with. If you think this is the same as the registration exam, then you are dead wrong." At the same time, Ulda instantly drew the long blade at his waist. He understood just as clearly that this was nothing like the exam. He had always been best in group combat, and only with allies beside him could he draw out his full strength. On the other side, Rowu suddenly whipped his head around, as if he had sensed something strange in the surroundings. A thought rose in his mind at once. Was that feeling just now only his imagination? At that moment, Luca asked, "What are you planning to do with the royal horn now? Are we taking it to the Certification Bureau, or are we still going to protect it ourselves?" Rowu answered in a low voice, "That man is never going to stop. If we want to get the royal horn out of this forest alive, then there is only one way forward. We have to beat Dalkin." Hearing that, Luca said, "Actually, I just thought of two possible options. The first is to have Ulda report the situation to the Certification Bureau immediately and wait for reinforcements. But our opponent is Dalkin. The only people who could realistically arrive fast enough and suppress him would be powerhouses on Lodi's level. And if no one like that is nearby, then gathering a support team would take far too long. On top of that, with Dalkin's control over Prana, I have no confidence we could keep dodging his pursuit the whole time." After laying that out, Luca added, But there is actually a second option too, and it is much simpler. The scene shifted. At that moment, Dalkin was coldly watching the aura coming off Ulda and Eddie. Even he had not expected that the two of them could use prana as well, but neither of them had been born with that power. They only awakened it after going through certain drastic turning points in life. Prana usually only awakens under very specific conditions. Without the right trigger, that power can sleep inside someone forever. Ulda had spent years surviving in the mercenary world and had long since carved the instincts of team combat into his bones. His judgment of battlefield flow and enemy strength was frighteningly precise. Eddie, meanwhile, was an archer prodigy blessed with exceptional talent, personally trained by masters from an early age, and his archery skill was something few in the world could rival. The tragic part was that neither of them had ever truly tasted defeat before, but the fortunate part was that they had recently met Wu. After witnessing a true prana wielder with their own eyes, the power they had built up inside themselves finally seemed enough to push their own awakening through. In the next instant, Ulda tightened his grip on his blade and charged Dalkin head-on. Dalkin showed no fear at all. He simply drew back his fist and smashed it straight toward him. Ulda twisted his body at the last moment, barely slipping past the fatal blow, while swinging up his blade to block. The instant their attacks collided, shock flooded Ulda's face. So this was the real power of prana. At the same time, Eddie drew his bow to the limit in the rear, a thought flashing through his mind. He had always been able to use prana freely in the forest, but this was the first time he could see the flow of an opponent's energy this clearly. If that was true, then now he could fire arrows with absolute precision. In the next second, he unleashed a pinpoint shot aimed straight at Dalkin's shoulder. Bastard, get lost! But just as the arrow closed in on Dalkin, it was violently knocked aside by the prana radiating off his body. At the same moment, Ulda's smoke bomb came flying in right after it. Thick smoke burst open and swallowed Dalkin's figure whole. But the second he stepped out of the smoke, one of Eddie's arrows slammed into his abdomen. Dalkin raised his head at once, only to see Eddie crouched high on a tree branch, bow drawn tight. His eyes locked on him without the slightest shift. No matter which direction Dalkin tried to dodge, Eddie could instantly mark the path, and Ulda would follow up right away. As long as the archer kept feeding the position, the mercenaries' pursuit would never stop. Their coordination had become frighteningly precise, and yet Dalkin could still read even their feints ahead of time. Even when they managed to crack his rhythm for a brief second, they still could not get past his terrifyingly accurate defense. No real opening ever appeared. Just then, Ulda tried once more to force his way into close range, but Dalkin looked at them with open contempt. You two really do have plenty of dirty little tricks, but I still have not even used my full strength against you. No amount of cleverness matters. In front of real power, this gap cannot be closed. The moment those words fell, Ulda clenched his teeth and barked back in fury at Dalkin's arrogance. At the same time, Eddie seized the opening and fired another vicious arrow. But in Dalkin's eyes, Ulda's slash was still laughably slow. After all, this man was a top powerhouse ranked 48 on the overall speed rankings. In the next instant, as disbelief spread across Ulda's face, Dalkin applied the slightest bit of force and crushed the blade in Ulda's hand to pieces. Then Dalkin drove out another brutal kick and sent Ulda flying. In that instant, Ulda felt a tearing wave of pain spread through his entire body. Up in the tree, Eddie's face changed immediately when he saw it happen. But before he could even react, Dalkin moved first and blasted him straight out of the branches. Lying on the ground, Ulda gritted his teeth and called out Eddie's name. Dalkin only looked down at them with contempt and sneered. Your five senses really are sharp. Too bad those little tricks of yours do not amount to anything. As soon as he said that, he drew back his fist and slammed it down toward Ulda again. But at that exact moment, a blade wrapped in dazzling green light tore through the air and came slashing in at incredible speed. The strike crashed into Dalkin's arm, and for the first time, a look of confusion crossed his face. Then Rowu's voice rang out. Eddie, thanks for that sword. It was because of that blade that I made it here in time. Dalkin's face darkened at once. You again. Rowu stared straight at him and said in a low voice, This was the last simple option Luca gave me. And that option is to take you down myself. Just like that, the battle between Rowu, ranked 27-28 on the adventurer rankings, and Dalkin, ranked 672, was finally about to begin.